All right, so welcome everyone who's watching the recording and to those of us who are live here at our session. And the session's called Experiments in AI Enhanced Portfolio Reflection by Kristina Hoeppner, who is at Catalyst IT down in Wellington, New Zealand. We're so grateful to have our global connections participate in our conference. And I will just hand it over to Kristina so I don't take any more of her time.
Thank you so much for the introductions, Kevin. It's wonderful to be part of yet another Peralta Equity conference. Thank you so much, Kevin, Didem, and the rest of the team for making it possible for us to gather once a year to talk about equity-related topics. And in my case, it is going to be about artificial intelligence, a topic that is still on everybody's minds and does not seem to go away, judging by all the news that are coming through every single day. And so what I wanted to focus on today is very much a tiny, tiny slice of artificial intelligence in the area of education, and there in particular around portfolio practice. Now, if you have not yet used digital portfolios, electronic portfolios, whatever the terminology is on your campus or in your organization, do not fear. I have designed the questions so that you can also kind of look at them from a wider context in order for hopefully everybody to be able to participate. If you look into the chat, I did put in the link to the slides, just in case now also a second time, just if somebody came in after the recording started. So you have immediate access to the slides and then can also click all the links directly from there. And I will also put them into the chat at the appropriate times. So what are we going to do in today's workshop? And it is the third day of the Peralta conference, so we are in full workshop mode. So please do participate if you're able to, and I look forward to hearing from you. What we are doing first is just have a very brief look at what that thing artificial intelligence actually is, what we are talking about, so that we all know in which area we are engaging today with that. And then, of course, I'd like to know where you stand in regards to the use of artificial intelligence. Next, we look at when you might want to use AI, in particular, of course, with portfolio practice. But if you haven't used portfolios yet, then also in the wider education context, using the words that I'm giving. And then we are looking directly at one particular tool that I'd like you to have an experiment with and explore for yourself so you can get an idea of whether that is something that could be useful for your own classes to introduce and look at the use of artificial intelligence from a different lens. And so I'm really excited to go through that activity with you and reflect on your practice so far. So let's get started right away because our workshop is a very rapid one. And so then what is AI? Well, artificial intelligence is being used for a lot of things. And so it's kind of a very big circle, encompasses many, many different areas. And so in general, artificial intelligence is intelligence exhibited by machines, but it doesn't quite necessarily say what sort of intelligence, because there's many different types. And so a subset of that would be machine learning. So where machines learn from the data that is fed into them in order to make predictions, so that it's not always a human at the end who then calculates the data and draws connections from that, but that a machine learns over time, learns the patterns over time, and then can make predictions from that. And again, another subset of machine learning then is deep learning, which is the use of artificial neural networks and in order to go make things even more specific, help with the predictions, and then learn from those predictions again. And that is the area in which generative AI, or Gen AI, how we are going to abbreviate it in this session, is located. In particular, also the large language models, LLM, that have taken the world by storm a few years ago, and that are being used extensively, and what a lot of people these days refer to as artificial intelligence. But there is much, much more around AI than using large language models. In today's session, though, we are going to focus on the use of large language models and looking at how chatbots and similar tools could be used in a very good way in education, in particular in portfolio practice, to support the student learning. Now, I would like to know from you where you stand with generative AI. For that, please do use the annotation tool that you should see on your screen, probably at the top of the screen or on the side, where you can then use one of the stamps, should be reflected with a check mark, and put your stamp onto the slide to the statement that applies to you. So, have you heard of it but haven't actually used it? Do you deliberately not use it? Have you used chatbots a few times to test them out? Have you used them privately but not really in the classroom? Have you created a few activities, or do you use it often and allow students to use it? Or have you even published on the topic? Where do you stand? And maybe you're also somewhere in between. Then, of course, you're also very welcome to put your stamp onto multiple things or somewhere in between. I do see some responses come through. So people have been using it privately, but not necessarily for class. Others have created a few activities and dabbled in it. And some also use it often and allow students to use it. Does anybody want to expand on the use either by grabbing the microphone or using the chat? Surely used it twice briefly. And somebody might have published on the topic, question mark?
I put the question mark because I'm not sure when I will, but it's a goal.
Okay. Oh, I should have put the future state in there. Yeah. I would look forward to your book on that, Kevin. Okay, so we've seen that people are not adverse to using generative AI, and there have been kind of the majority is already that they've created a bunch of activities, and some even use it often and allow students to use it in their classrooms. That's very good to know where you stand. And generative AI, that is mainly the large language models. Now, oops, I should be clearing the check marks. There we go. Now, when do you use artificial intelligence? Here I'm giving you a few words to consider, and they are based on the portfolio creation cycle of creating learning evidence. So any of the activities that your students engage in, where they collect their learning evidence, which would be typically outside of the portfolio, so prior to sending things to the portfolio. So when they are writing, when they are drafting, maybe also when they are working on a video or similar, or any other activities that they are going through. Is it in that step, or is it also in the collection step and in the organizing step? So when they decide to put their learning evidence into their portfolio area for later use? Or is it when they are curating and reflecting on their learning? That's when they are using artificial intelligence. So when they are writing their reflections, when they are thinking back about what they have done. Or is it also when they are conversing with other students around their portfolios, when they are engaging with others on the portfolio? Do they maybe get any insights or automated summaries of their portfolio that they can then consider for further learning? Or do they also use it when they connect with others in the classroom? Maybe also to create portfolios together collaboratively, or when they are making further connections, building their networks, and enhancing their learning. Again, you can use the annotation tool to put your check mark or any other symbol that you'd like to use on or near the activities where you have been using AI or where you're thinking of potentially using artificial intelligence. Got one for the create and collect. And if you'd like to expand on that in the chat, how you're using artificial intelligence for the work that you had selected or using the microphone, then that would be wonderful to get to know a little bit more of what you're using it for specifically. Most of the annotations are in that first part. So the creation aspect of content, the collection and organizing of content, and then also the curation so far. Kevin, are you using it yourself?
Indeed, I am. And we had a great session 2 sessions ago where they used the LLM to improve the instructions for assignments by applying the tilt or the transparency and learning and teaching principles to the instructions. And very clever. And I look forward to even taking it a step further and turning my text-based instructions into a video with an text-to-video AI tool, so that when students may be more motivated to review the instructions if it's a different format. So that's something that I'm looking forward to trying.
So also applying UDL, Universal Design of Learning principles then to make instructions available in different modalities. Can we then see a virtual Kevin very soon that we can all add to our courses?
I don't know if people would want a virtual Kevin, but maybe a virtual cartoon cat.
Nice. And in the chat, there's Chelsea said, it helped me create some handouts for class and also gave me lesson ideas. And so for the creation of the handouts, did you give it a structure, or did you go over what the chatbot had then created for you?
Sorry, I'm eating. That's why I'm off camera.
That's fine.
I gave it, yes, I gave it I was actually teaching some grammar points, so I had it kind of flesh out example sentences for me. I had a few, I plugged in some of my own information, it added to it, and then it organized it into like a beautiful Google Doc that I could just use. I loved how it was laid out. And then for the lesson plans, I told it what I wanted to teach, and then I asked for just like some engaging ways, activities, because I have my own ideas, but sometimes they feel stale. So I just wanted to see what it came up with.
So it kind of synthesized probably a few things for you. And then did you also review it before you gave it to your students?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely.
Did you find any problems with what had been suggested to you where you thought, that's not quite what the literature says or how we've been teaching it?
No, I didn't, because it was very simple. It wasn't like doing
Okay,
lecture notes for me. It was
right.
just, yeah, it was a straightforward activity. And I did make a couple of tweaks to the sentences that it gave me, the examples. But yeah,
Yeah, I guess grammar hasn't really changed much over the years in the grand scheme of things, so
right.
that anything there would be quite formulaic and more or less accurate, rather than what is the latest research on quantum physics, maybe, where there
Exactly.
might be more contentious opinions around.
Yes.
Then enjoy your lunch, afternoon tea, or dinner.
Thank you.
So what we can also see here on the slide with the answers that you had given, that they concentrate themselves mainly in the create, collect, and curate stages of the portfolio creation process, or in some cases then just in general for the activities for what you have been using AI, rather than in the conversations and the connections. And I'm kind of liking that, because that means that hopefully when you give feedback to students on their work, that is still generated by you rather than entirely by the AI. And also when you otherwise engage with students, that they still have a human on the other end. But of course, yeah, creation of content can be done or can be facilitated by artificial intelligence. But also, as Chelsea had said herself, it is always necessary to review it and make tweaks, and then also personalize it more, because the AI might not really know what you're talking about. And so in this case, typically, we use AI to receive answers. However, when we are thinking about the portfolio creation process, there is students should be engaged in that themselves, especially when it comes to the reflection, because we don't really want students to outsource that to a tool, because it is the reflection through which we are learning. And so in the portfolio process, then I think using artificial intelligence has many different areas where we can employ it. For example, in the last session, we had Denise and Stephanie talk about improving equity through accessibility and having tools available, in their case, in the learning management system, to check for accessibility issues. For example, is there enough color contrast in there? In other cases, you might check your syllabus for the right way of using words, or for condensing information, or for summarizing things in different ways, or as Kevin mentioned, for changing the entire format of the instructions to make a video out of text immediately. So for all of those things, artificial intelligence can be useful and gives you answers. And students, of course, could create content, learn and use it for their own learning, also using artificial intelligence for that, in particular, generative AI. However, is that also a good use when they are during the reflection? And that is kind of the focus of the rest of my session with you, that we are looking at a tool that can help us with that reflection without giving answers. But before we go to that, and let me clear everything again, I'd like us to take a very quick step back, because we are using these, we are often using these tools and having signed up to terms and conditions and privacy statements a long, long time ago. But do we regularly go back to them? Do we actually know what is in them? Because especially with something contentious as generative AI, where content is created based on predictions, based on what is in the training data, so the corpus of the tool, is something that, especially when it comes to generating content, can be quite tricky because it doesn't necessarily always reflect the reality. So many of you will probably have heard about the hallucinations, or that resources and references are made up, or that wrong advice is given. And so before we are actually using an AI tool, I'd like for us to take a quick excursion into one of those terms of use and privacy statements, and this one from OpenAI, just to bring it a bit up front to you, to make it transparent of what is actually in there. So the first thing, and we are not going to read the entire text, so I'm just highlighting a few things for you there. So what is in there says that you are responsible for the content that is going to be presented to you on screen. And content really means the input and the output. So the input, that is what you type, and the output is what the large language model gives back to you. So you are also responsible for that, even though you have not written it. So if you're using it, you are responsible for it, and also making sure that it's accurate. And then we may also use your content. So whatever you put into the chatbot can be used by the company to train it, to work with it further, to maybe also showcase it somewhere on their website. And that can, of course, be problematic, especially if you're putting in maybe student names, or if you are putting in faculty names, or some confidential content that maybe should not be used outside of your organization. All of that, what you're putting in, can be used by the organization that is providing that service, in this case, OpenAI. Of course, you can opt out of having your content collected, but you just need to trust the company that they are really not using it. But in the case of OpenAI, it's actually not that easy to opt out of that collection of content. And so here we are really talking about the ChatGPT interface. So there are also ways of, if you're going through a technical interface, that you're automatically opted out of the content collection. But since the majority of people are just logging in through the website, this is what applies to them. So big parts on this slide, you are responsible for everything that you put into it and that you get out of it. Now, if you're continuing on, in this case, to the privacy statement, then you see that the output does not accurately reflect real people, places, or facts. So it might be fabricated because it is generated out of all the words that are in the training data and out of those predictions. So somebody has applied machine learning to make predictions based on, these are the words that often go together. These are the words that we have seen go together very frequently. However, that might not always be the case. So that's why it's always important that any output that is being produced and presented is also checked. Is it actually correct? And the onus is really put onto you. And what Kevin says in the chat is also true. At times I feel like I spend more time checking the accuracy of the chatbot output, and I assume than had he written it himself. Now, going further on, they even acknowledge that we should not rely on that output from the service because it may not be accurate. And it could be incomplete, inaccurate, or incorrect, or even offensive. And so going back to the earlier statement that was made, that you are responsible for the output, again, the onus is on you to make sure that when you use that output, that it does not violate any other rights or any other responsibilities that you have in the space where you are using that output. So if you're using it, for example, in a classroom, then you still need to comply with your organization's terms of use and privacy statements. So you cannot just rely on what the chatbot has given to you. And that is, I think, where a lot of the difficulty in using some of those AI tools comes in, because it's not necessarily accurate, because it has been trained on certain content, and not just that, it has been trained on content in a certain way. So there can be quite a bit of bias in it. And we simply do not know, because we don't know the training data that has gone in, and we often also don't know what the training parameters were, what the tool was told of how to work with the content and how to make its predictions. So there can be lots, and there are lots and lots of biases in there that would need to be contended with. And that's why I find often using a Gen AI tool to just spit out text and give us suggestions can be quite okay in certain areas, especially when there's a very defined objective way of talking about a topic. But when it comes to more subjectivity, or when we are looking into growth, it can be problematic. Or also if you're looking outside of the United States, if you're wanting to know content on different countries, but you don't necessarily know how much data of that country is actually in there, or of a culture. And often also, content is just scraped off the internet without the consent of the people that have put it up there under a particular license. So all of that to keep in mind, I'm a bit hesitant to use that in portfolios in general to create content for me, because then it might not necessarily be my content. And so what I want to show to you today is a tool that actually puts that all a bit, turns that all a bit on its head. And I just need to make sure that I can copy the activity link also in the chat where you can access it. So Riff is a tool that was developed by Dr. Leticia Pretas Cavagnaro at Stanford's D School, the Hoeppner Institute of Design. And it is backed by research. It is backed by research on reflection. And so what Riff does is it gives you a question, and then you provide the answers. And then based on your answer, it gives you new questions. So it doesn't give you the answer like every other chatbot. You still have to think, and you are taken deeper into the reflection. It assists with that reflection because we don't always have an instructor close by that can help us go through the reflection. And so using a tool like that can really deepen the reflection and go into more context. For everybody outside of the United States, the data does go to the US because Riff itself, the chatbot, sits on US servers. However, the input is not used for training, so it does not go to OpenAI or to Anthropic, depending on which model Leticia is using in it. But it does go to a server, and an educator has access to what the students have written and can use that text for further activities. And so what I'd like us to do now for just about 5 minutes is that you go to the chatbot and here it is in action in large, that you go to the chatbot and answer the question, click send, and then see what you get back from Riff, and then answer that question again, click send, and do that 3 to 4 times so that we have a little conversation going and that you can also see what Riff does, kind of how the AI answers your questions. And then I will show you what the educator sees on the back end. So if you're putting something in, please do be mindful, maybe not to use real names of people, because your answer might also show up here on screen. So I'll just give you 5 minutes to interact with this chatbot. And for those that might need the URL again, I'll just put it into the chat. Just about 1 minute left. Okay, I've seen some answers come through. So, what are your impressions so far of this type of using generative AI? And feel free to use the microphone or type your answer into the chat. Jamie, why do you think it is fantastic?
Just because it keeps going. Sometimes I get really trite answers when I give a reflection, and they just kind of answer what they think I want to know or hear. And so being able to make them work at it and not just put something blah down, I think is really good.
Yeah. And Chelsea says, I'm really having to think. And yeah, that's why I wanted you to explore it and experience it yourself, because it does make you think. It has a reflection framework built in. As I said, Leticia is researching reflection. And so it is using the what, so what, now what framework of reflection from Borton. And so that first question that you see, how have you used AI in your teaching or learning? Describe an experience that stands out to you. Is that summarizing state? And after that, it goes into the reflection. So here you see the general information that I fed it about the activity, which is basically the intro text, an opening question, and then I'm also giving some context. And that is all that I need as a teacher in this case, because the reflection framework is built in. So I do not need to prompt the chatbot to give me those answers and how to structure the answer. So you could also use Poe or anything else where you create your own chatbots. However, there you have to do much more work as a teacher because it doesn't come with that reflection framework. And so here, all of that is already built in, and as we'll see in a second, it will also try to keep you on track. So if you're looking at the activity log now, and here you see the educator interface. In the activity log as educator, I can see who has given answers and also how many answers they have given. So a few of you have tried it. And so that's a nice way then also of bringing all of these answers back into the classroom. So if you're looking at the first one, why is quantum mechanics so popular? The answer from Riff is actually always trying to get you back on track, going into the reflection, rather than hijacking the chatbot to talk about something completely different. And that is where also that context comes in, because it will only answer the questions in that regard. So here at the bottom, it picks up my context that you're in a workshop focusing on the art roles in e-portfolios and educational practice. And so it always tries to get back to that part. And then we have that someone has, and you see how many turns somebody has taken. And so if you're looking at the lesson planning and creating worksheet, you see that the first responses were short, and then Riff always asks more questions. So that goes back to that reflection research, that it can mirror what you had put in and expand on that. And so as Jamie had said, it makes you it goes deeper. It doesn't just give you you just don't give simple answers. And because you are, as also Chelsea pointed out, have to think about these follow-on questions that the chatbot gives you. And these questions are tailored to the responses you had given prior, so that it is a very personalized reflection on your topic. because in portfolio practice, it's been a long tradition to give questions to students to reflect on. These have to be fairly generic in most cases to be able to capture all the possibilities that students could go into. And that is perfectly fine, because sometimes also a generic question can be leading you into deeper reflection. What Riff offers, though, in addition to that, is that you can very specifically reflect on what you had written previously, so that you go deeper in that context that you're currently in. And that's why I like this part very much, because it offers us that personalization that we can give students in order to think more about their own situation, about their own context. And as you can see here, Riff does not provide any answers. It kind of summarizes what you had said before, and then it asks further questions. But you can't hijack it to give you answers. So if anybody tried that, you are a bit out of luck. So that is also the work that has gone into the tool, so that it cannot be used as a regular chatbot to give you answers. It always asks you questions. What is also built in, that was an addition that was made last year, is the Go Copilot. And here, as educator, you can get more insight into all of the responses that the students have given. So if you wanted, for example, to look at the depth of reflection, common themes that have developed, or the learning progress, then you can simply select one of those areas, and then it summarizes all the responses from your students. So in our case, we are in a fairly small session with 16 people, so it might be relatively easy at some point to still scan through the responses from every one of you. However, if you have a class of 30, 50, 100, or 150 students, that might be a bit trickier. And that is now where the generative AI comes in, that it can summarize all of the responses and then give you an initial response on, in this case, the depth of the reflection. So it's also a very nice teaching tool, because you can then see what you might want to talk about with students in the future in the classroom, how you want to bring back their responses to the classroom, to talk about them, to converse with your students about their learning experiences and their reflections. Does anybody else want to share about their experience of using the tool just now for a couple of minutes?
I felt that it did a really good job, not only of keeping me on track, but taking the next step forward. So when it asked me, like, how did I notice changes when I used AI to improve my instructions from one semester to another, and I said it was difficult to gauge because there was so much time had passed between the two assignments. And it said, well, so that's fair. What metrics or feedback mechanisms might you consider implementing? And so it basically got me to, you know, as Chelsea mentioned in the chat, it really made me think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, Kevin, completely spot on, because it has that reflection framework built in. It doesn't leave you at that summarizing state, which is very easy to do. Just talk about what you have done, that initial question, but really thinking more deeply about, now, what does that mean for you? And so what are you taking from that experience? And that is also where I find that context that you can define in the chatbot really useful, because it will pick up on that. So if you are putting something in there, you could put something in, well, we want to look at the strategy for our college in the next 5 years and to innovate our curriculum. After a couple of turns or so, it will come to that question and ask you, so now how do you want to implement that going forward, and take you into that additional thinking, that really that deep reflection in order to take your learning further. Yes, and as Jamie pointed out, it's language, it's growth mindset, which is really good. So yeah. And yes, Chelsea, you don't need to log in to use it. So that's really easy then for students to use, because all that is needed is that URL that you can give to students. There is also an embed code so that you can put it into your course in the learning management system, so that students don't even need to leave the space in order to provide their answers. Our chatbot was set up so that I do not collect your names, but if you have a class in which you do also want to provide your own personal feedback to students or assist them further in their learning, then you can collect names. And so it just really needs to be made clear then to the students what you are going to collect, what information you are going to collect, have that transparent for them in order to make sure that they know what is happening with their answers. And the students can also have the answers emailed to them. So when you enter the chatbot, for example, by typing "end" into the answer box, and then you have the possibility to email the chat log to you and also a summary of your own conversation, so that the bot just gives you a bit of an overview of what has been discussed, so that you can save that for yourself and maybe also include into your portfolio itself. Now we are coming to the end of today's session. And so I'd just like to point out a few resources that you might be interested in exploring further. And they are all now in the chat for the session. And that is the Digital Ethics Principles in ePortfolios, especially since we are engaging in a digital world. ABLE, the Association for Authentic, Experimental, and Evidence-Based Learning. We have put together some principles to work in portfolios that could also be extrapolated and made use of in other educational contexts. And then what is next for you on your generative AI journey? I'd like you to reflect on that. And please do feel free to use the chatbot for that if you like, and have a think of it. Have a think with your colleagues. And then there are a number of resources that you can find in the chat. And if you have not yet used artificial intelligence or portfolios much, then I'd also like to invite you to listen to my podcast, where I'm interviewing people from around the world on what they are doing with portfolios, how they are including them in their own professional work and work with their students. And so I'd like to thank you for coming along this afternoon, evening, or morning in your time zone to have a little think about how artificial intelligence turned on its head might be very useful for your students to reflect on their own practice, or also for yourself to reflect on your own practice yourself. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Kristina. I hope everybody in the workshop will join me in saying kudos and thank you for leading us through such a fun and engaging activity. I have seen just lots of people saying that they can't wait to try this out with their own students and other comments like that. So wonderful idea. And I even put that because you linked to the digital ethics principles, we could train the Riff bot to help people think through how to apply the principles in their own course. But I am going to stop the recording and then we can set up our next speaker. So again, everybody, let's thank Kristina for a fantastic workshop. And
Thanks, everybody.